Hello, and welcome wherever you are joining us from across the globe. Welcome to Critical Reflections with your critical friend. I'm your critical friend, and here this week discussing all things diversity, compassion in business and leadership. And thank you for joining us, whether you're watching live now or whether you are watching later on. Please feel free to pop in the chat where you are calling from or where you are joining us from. I've got an expert panel, and then I'm going to introduce them in just a moment, and I want you to pop your questions in the chat. So do pop in and say hi. So let me introduce my panel. So we've got Marsha Ramroop. I'm going to give introductions just shortly. Welcome, Marsha. We've got Garry Turner. Welcome, Garry. We have Rob Neal, and we have the wonderful Thom. Dennis. So here is my expert panel for today. So we have Marsha Ramroop, who's the former director of diversity, law institute architect, executive director of BDI at Building People, and author of Building Improvement. I'm sure Marsha will talk about that in just a few minutes. And we have Garry, who is director at Radicality, UK. That has a background in supply chain sales and chemicals. You may know him as Vulnerable Garry, or by the other headline of Change is an Inside Job. So welcome, Garry. Thank you for joining. We've got Thom Dennis, who's a founder of Serenity and Leadership, does all things leadership, an accomplished speaker and contributor to the executive support magazine, developing leaders across the globe. Okay, and we have Rob Neal, OBE, I must add, who is actually the director of Crystal Alliance, known for his groundbreaking work in civil service around culture, race, and equalities, and is wearing his OBE very well. So, and I know he's also just come back from holiday, but he's looking very well. And thank you for joining us. So, this is your expert panel. And we are going to be talking today about psychological safety, leaving you with some tips. Everyone's an expert in their own field. They've got experience in different sectors and different spaces and industries. And hopefully today we can share with you some things to get you going on your journey, connect with all of us so that we can explore with you further how we may be able to support you. We're not here to sell anything. We're just here to really impart some knowledge, because we're all very committed and passionate about the work that we are doing. So before we get going, I just want to say hi to a couple of people that we've got. We've got Aishwarya, who's here. Welcome, Aishwarya. We've got Marcia Lee as well, who's from across the pond in Washington, DC. And we have Stella, who's here from London, UK. So thank you very much for joining us. And we've got a couple of others as well that are on. Get those questions ready for this panel. Okay, so are you all belted up and buckled up and ready to go? Because it's going to be an action-packed hour. I can feel it. Can't you?
I don't know. I mean, I'm strapped in anyway.
Good. We all need to be strapped in. Okay, so let's kick off. So for those of you that may not be aware, or for those of you that are in the UK, and just a little update, this series, it started off with, the riots that took place in the UK. Even though the headline was about race, it was really embedded around culture and religion. Those were really the main headlines. And out of that, even though it feels like a distant But what isn't very distant is the fact that the lasting memories of the trauma are still very there, and psychological safety. How do we create that in our communities, in our workplaces, in our spaces? So those are the things that we want to really touch on today, and hopefully, I'm fully aware I didn't introduce myself as well, but I'm sure that will come along as we go. So I've asked my trusted panel here to give us a kind of couple of minutes as an overview, because they've been working in different spaces and sectors and industries. So just a couple of minutes. Does it feel different across sectors and spaces? So let's start with you, Marsha. And if you should tell us what space it is that you know you've got your experience in as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Tony. I'm really excited to be having this conversation with this stellar group of people. So thank you for inviting me. Like you say, one of my former roles was as Director of Inclusion and Diversity for the Royal Institute of British Architects. I started that role and left it, about sort of three years ago is when I started it. And after finishing that role, I have I suppose cemented my reputation as an inclusion strategist, particularly in architecture and the built environment, hence the book Building Inclusion, which only came out a couple of weeks ago, actually. And one of the key things about looking at the built environment sector, really, and the impact of the riots in some respects, the way that I have been looking at it is, how do our physical spaces encourage and promote, the collaboration or the segregation of communities, and has that conversation really started to impact those who are responsible for creating and maintaining and deciding and planning the physical environments in which we live? And my reflection is that it really hasn't. So I think it's quite easy. I'd be interested to hear what the others think, but I think it's quite easy to stand up to the kind of behaviours that we saw in the riots. I mean, it's easy to stop and condemn, a mother walking along the street with their child shouting out the P word. But when you're looking at the systems and the structures and the behaviours that still exist, which then impact the creation of our built environment, have the professionals really been reflecting on that? I'm sorry to say they're really not. Whereas on an individual basis, of course, it's quite straightforward to stand up and say we condemn the kind of destruction that we've seen. And whether people are then even turning around to their colleagues to say, what are we going to do differently here in our own environments? Less so, and that's why this work is so important.
No, that's great. That was a really great way to kick off. Thank you so much, Marsha. And one of the things that was kind of coming to me, we will be going around, but I just wanted, what was coming to me was, you're speaking very strategically, which is fine, and just operationally, for those that are starting out, what do our buildings look like? What do our workspaces look like? Are they open plan, or has everybody got their own little office? Everyone wants their office with their title on the door and locked away. So when we develop in our conversation, it's interesting to bring that in, especially as we've got hybrid working, satellite working, people are very remote. So how can we really connect with them when they're not in person? So thank you so much for contributing that at this stage. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. So hold that thought, everyone. Garry, over to you.
Thanks, Tony. So interesting, Marsha. There's a lot of similarities in my area, which is around the extractive industries. And what I mean by that is pharmaceuticals, big oil, energy, really, those sectors that go behind everything as life as we know it today. And what was really interesting, actually, that came up during the riots, interestingly, was there wasn't safe spaces. So those that were Muslim, those that identified as anything that wasn't straight Caucasian, there was nowhere for those people to actually express how they felt or what was going on for them. And when I actually tried to open up those spaces with the leadership, it was literally silenced. It was like, look, everybody, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It will pass. So there's a real sort of almost supremacist sort of like, it's okay, we don't need to deal with this. It's not, it's going to pass. Don't worry about it. So I think there's definitely there's what I would leave you with as an opener, Tony. There's a really interesting paradox within these extractive sectors, which is there's a massive focus on health and safety, physical, but almost zero conscious, intentional work done around creating psychologically safe spaces for people. So it's almost like that hidden, if we can't see it, we don't need to worry about it sort of mindset.
That human element, that human aspect.
It's so interesting. But
it's more than that.
Yeah, but it's fascinating that despite all of us on the call now and many people watching us, the money being left on the table, the performance being left on the table by not creating these spaces is off the charts. So it's a really interesting sort of a paradox that I see within my area, within the extractive industries.
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much, Garry. And really, this is what we can all, as a panel, elaborate on a little bit more as we delve into this conversation. Rob's, giving us his disapproving look and shaking his head. So I'm sure he's got something that he wants to say about that. But before we do, if you can hold that thought, please, Rob, just for a moment. I'm going to move over to Thom to share from. Can you share a particular industry that you may have experienced or what that conjures for you? Thank you so much, Thom.
Yeah, well, my background was in the military, and I spent quite a while in the Royal Marines. But I've spent longer out of that, and a little bit like Garry, the three sort of industries that I've spent most of my time in are banking, energy, and pharma. I think, Garry, I think a lot of what you said, I completely agree with. And in fact, I did a study within for the Society of Petroleum Engineers some years ago about sexual harassment. And it really struck me as totally paradoxical that, yes, there is so much effort around safety, huge effort. Unless you're involved in that industry, you have no idea how much effort is put into safety, and yet they pay no attention whatsoever to the psychological safety, particularly of women, for instance, on rigs and stuff like, or just in the office. And I think you talk about psychological safety, it is just not. When they talk about safety, they totally do not talk about psychological safety. It's a complete blind spot. And I think it's really, really sort of fascinating. But I just put one other point out there, and that's about power, because I think that a lot of the dynamics that we are looking at are around power, the power of the police, the power of the hierarchy in organizations, and the only power that people who feel so disenfranchised and disempowered is to go out on the streets and just express a level of suppression that has been building up for ages. Just even going back to the Brixton riots in 1981, so little has changed, actually.
Thank you so much, Thom. Really, really appreciate that. And it makes me think about, industries like the police, for example, as well, where, they can be seen as the safe pair of hands that should be there. So how are they having those spaces as well? So this is something else that we can really get deep into and explore. And Rob, over to you. Deep in thought, thinking deep.
Always encouraged by the people I'm surrounded by. Always deep in thought. Tony, I do want to start, Tony, by saying thank you and your show, not just for this platform at this time, but having been a previous visitor, the way in which you are able to give opportunity and ventilation to these critical discussions. So thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you.
and listening to my friends kick us off with the 2 minutes, I'm bound to say in full approval about how complex and multidimensional a discussion like this is. You know, I hail from the public sector, specifically Whitehall civil service, and for 75% of my 40 years working as a civil servant, I worked in the judicial system at what's now called the Ministry of Justice. I started when it was known as the Lord Chancellor's Department, and worked with the Court Service Agency, worked with Her Majesty's Court Service, worked with probation. And I come at my initial contribution on this conversation by looking at some of the response of the present government to those found guilty of inappropriate behavior, offensive behavior, causing the riots, inciting the riots, literally inciting the riots, and the toughest measures possible, even groups of judiciary, Tony, unprecedented, requesting for further powers to further punish with custodial sentences for those with due process found guilty, just to underline that point. And I think, picking up on something I heard Thom say, that the power dynamics are really interesting, because I think when something like this happens and it comes to prominence, it's on our TV screens, it's on our radio channels, it's on the front pages, the middle pages, even the back pages of that which we read, it's on every device. When things like this happen, it brings to the fore of our collective consciousness that something's wrong, something's going wrong in our society. And people start making the links. When politicians make comments that give people permission to misbehave, to cause offense, we shouldn't forget the link when it comes to the moment of punishment. Because when we talk about steps to creating those safe spaces, people want to know that justice is possible.
Absolutely. That's right.
Because human behavior over the generations, the centuries, human behavior is such that people will break the law. It's in us. Some people will say that some laws are created to be broken, but when they're broken, what do those who are tasked with sentencing, with finding the appropriate punishment, what do? Do they within let's not forget, a number of people responsible for what took place during the race riots are going into work and working alongside honest, upstanding people who want to do a good day's work for a half decent day's pay and be kind to their neighbor. They're working alongside those people.
Absolutely.
And we shouldn't forget that that's what makes part of this problem so challenging. How do we navigate that space when we know that there are people next door to each other who would sooner see their demise than to see what the richness and beauty of their difference is all about?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Rob. Now, where do we start unpicking this in the short time that we have? So I just want to kind of come back on the back of what Rob has opened up with, which is very insightful, and really just thinking about, you know, the punitive side of things, the punishment side of things, you know, custodial sentences, but when our prisons are already overpopulated. So what happens there? You know, there needs to be that sense of justice, because when people are opening up and being vulnerable, they need to know that it's worth it, that action is going to be taken, something is going to happen, you know, as a result of me being vulnerable, or, you know, exercising this whistleblowing or whatever it is. But ultimately, does it happen, or is that person shuffled out? Or, you know, it's really interesting. So thank you for opening that massive can of worms there, Rob. No, it's fine, because that's what we're here for, to unpick all of this. So at this moment, I'm just going to open it up to Marsha, Garry, Thom. If you want to come in on anything that anyone else has said, whether that's the architect environment, open plan offices, hybrid working, there's open spaces that Garry's been exploring for people to have those conversations, you know, whether it's Thom and talking about, you know, different industries and the power aspect, or what Rob has just kind of disclosed in terms of, politicians and that side of the judicial system. So I'm just going to throw it out
there's
to the
so
panel
much
for a couple of
there.
minutes.
Tony,
take your
oh my
pick.
gosh, we're here forever. I mean, I've got so much to say about all of those things.
It's your next book, Marsha.
Yeah, exactly. Just line it up. I mean, the first thing I would say, just to like maybe muddy the waters, as our friend Julie Marcel might say, that Martin Luther King said, "Riot is the language of the unheard." Now, we have had a political narrative which has really whipped up division, and given these people who've chosen to riot in this way, a sense that, okay, that's okay. And you can't say that there is nothing about what they're frustrated with doesn't have any basis. And I think that there is something that we need to unpick here, which is around what is it that is being unheard. The expression of that is something that we don't agree with, but what is it that hasn't been heard that we need to tackle, so that not only those of us who feel that we're victims of this rioting can feel heard, but those who feel like they felt they needed to riot feel heard. And what does safety look like for everybody in those circumstances? And to your point about health and safety being very physical and not emotional, not mental, and not psychological, I think there's something really key there. There's a piece of work called "Civility Saves Lives" in the medical profession, run by Chris. His name escapes me, but he's done the actual research which shows that when you are kind, compassionate, pay attention, respectful in the medical profession, it literally saves lives. And so there is a role, I think, to use health and safety legislation to fundamentally support that mental and physical well-being in the workplace. And then bringing it back to the physical spaces. I mean, obviously, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about working in the built environment is because I fundamentally believe that the way that we shape our physical spaces influences how we think, communicate, and behave with each other. So, ensuring that that broad spectrum of who's involved in decision making and how that design is created and how we engage people is really important. But that psychological safety piece, one of the things that I do mention in the book is that someone once said, well, psychological safety is when you give me the benefit of the doubt, and vulnerability is when I give you the benefit of the doubt, and being able to, bring those two things closer together, so that, there's no doubt at all that we're going to be in a safe space to hold our circumstances is something that we
that's great. Thank you so much, Marsha, for that contribution, because what brings it back together full circle is, it touches on what everyone was talking about, and in particular what Garry was talking about in terms of those leaders not creating those spaces for people to have those conversations. And if they're not creating those spaces, then it's like, well, you're not going to listen, so we're going to go out and make you listen. So ultimately, it's on us as well as leaders to be able to make sure that we've got some of those spaces for people to feel safe to contribute. So on that note, just for a minute, I just want to remind people that I can see that you've joined us. If you have any questions at all, please, we've only got this panel for another 35 minutes, so make the most of them. They're primed for questions, and they've got all of the answers. I'm confident we have all the answers here. And but just before Garry, I see you wanted to come in there, but I just wanted to kind of give an overview. Psychological safety was a term originally coined in 1999 by Amy Edmondson, Professor of Leadership and Management at the Harvard Business School. She defines psychological safety as a belief that no one will be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Thank you. Thom, Rob, Garry, any other thoughts about what anyone else has said so far before we move along?
I'll pop in quickly if you don't mind. There's something I just want to comment as well around underinvestment, not by businesses, but by the government. And I think there's a really important thing that's being missed here, which is quite often, which is the very people that are controlling the narrative and putting it out to say, like, you need to be at each other because they don't look like you or they're coming in on a small boat, are the very same people that are taking the bungs from the big corporates, and whether it's Conservative or whether it's Labour, the exact same pattern happens. So I want to invite anyone that's watching, and I think where these spaces come in is we need to be able to have that conversation and be able to interrogate on a diverse, inclusive, intersectional basis, where is the harm originating from root cause, not just what's the symptom. Because we're a very symptomatic society in the UK. We tend to put an awful lot of sticky plasters on things rather than get to the root, which is actually more and more wealth being extracted and given to the financiers and the 1%. And there's less and less available then for the NHS, for the communities, for Black and brown communities to get access to work. So fundamentally, the whole system is gamed towards what it's always been gamed towards, which is people that look and sound like me. And at some point, we've got to have more intersectional, more honest conversation around investment, because then we end up getting away from these riots, Tony. There has to be investment.
And social mobility comes into this as well as social justice, but the key thing that's jumping out, just based on what you said there, Garry, is role modeling.
Yes.
Role modeling from the highest right the way through. So I don't know, Thom, did you want to come in here? You've been very quiet. Are you in thoughts or deliberation?
Well, yes, it does. I mean, all this conversation makes me think. And actually, I feel a rising anger in me as we discuss this, because it's almost like even in this group here now, there's a degree of wringing of hands, and we've got to do this, we must do that, this has got to happen, and that's what people have been saying forever, and what it leads me to is that we exist within a completely dysfunctional system, and now I'm going to do it as well. We need to change it. And hang on, Rob. So how do we do that? How do we do that? And I think, yes, we're having the conversations and that, and people can sort of feel inspired and they go away. But what are we going to do about it? I think, I'm going to be talking to some head teachers, a convention of head teachers in a couple of weeks. And I've been really thinking about this, because education is so fundamental to all of this. And the educational system is setting us up to stay within this dysfunctional world. But we've got to start somewhere. And I think, organizations rot from the top. Yes. And what inspires me a little is the work that I sort of interact with around the people of sort of 20 years old and that kind of thing. Their mindset is so different. And I really hope that their non-acceptance of what we actually do accept will bring about some change. The difficulty is the older people get, the more conditioned they become, and all their rough edges are knocked off. And we lose the edge that we need. Your face is saying a million stories, Rob.
I know, it does. It's so telling, Rob. And just to pick up before we move over to Rob, if I can, Thom, you've got that whole piece in education where it was just a few years ago, British values was being delivered as part of the curriculum. And if you looked up the definition of British values, it was tolerating, other cultures and religions, with that word tolerate. I think it's only recently that it's changed. So I'm with you in terms of the educational system and what that looks like coming through and how, that is maneuvered. But I'm not going to hold you back any longer, Rob. Go for it. The floor is yours and then we'll bring in some comments from some of the people that are listening.
Yeah. Well, firstly, Thom, I am sorry if my face put you off or disrupted your flow. It is the only one I've got, but I didn't do it intentionally. I promise you that. In actual fact, I was actually internally, I was agreeing with certainly the essence of what I heard you saying. And by the way, I would go with the anger, surf with the anger, because in my experience, it's often a vital part of the fuel to do what's necessary. I think I can confidently predict that before joining this show, that each of us were doing something that's rooted in our values to bring about a fairer world. And after we're finished, we're probably going to go on to do that as well, if not ourselves individually, but as a collective with others. And
that's what part of this is about, empowering others.
Exactly.
Well.
I want to pick up on something I heard Garry say. And Garry and I have only just met and only in 2D, but already he feels like a long lost brother. And we're going to connect after this, because what I heard Garry talking about was some of the things that really get to the root of what causes some of the corruption we see later on. I mean, we should just try answering some of the questions about the individuals who made money, literally made money out of COVID.
Yeah.
Made money out of that tragedy, that almost avoidable crisis, some would argue. Indeed, Baroness Lawrence wrote a piece entitled with those very words, and talked about what could have been done and should have been done at the time, but wasn't. And, if we look at some of what, at least this early attempt, this early in the present government's manifesto, and I'm not making a political point, I really am not. I'm just trying to say what the differences might be. But it must be right, if we look overall, it must be right that we try and get to a point where our politicians, elected and serving, whether government or in shadow cabinet, don't have any other forms of income stream. That you go into politics knowing you're not in it to make money. You might go on to make money afterwards with a memoir or a book or a spell in the jungle, fair enough, but not when you're a serving MP. These are important differences in approach when we talk about a government that serves, that is there to serve the people, that is there not to make money and make futures for themselves whilst serving as a politician by earning even more money. I think that's really important, that we get to the root of some of that stuff. I do need to say, Tony, in finishing at this bit, I'm really not against people making lots of money. If you can earn lots of money, great, go for it. I go football each week, and some of the players are earning almost obscene amounts of money. But if it balances the books and the club can still run, go for it. Go for it. I am interested in what you spend your money on, and I am interested in a government that will look to the broader shoulders to bear the greater burden at times of need. I am interested in that.
Yeah.
For me, there's an inherent fairness in bringing that about. And so when we look to some of the root causes of some of the kind of outpouring and what we've seen with the riots, I do agree with Marsha. We need to find out what are we not hearing from people who are causing these riots. But what we need to make the linkages as to where and how they were given permission, and they felt that they could misbehave in that way.
I think some of it is that misalignment, isn't it, really? That before, those people that were rioting, they may have been on the same page as government, but now everything is, fractured almost. But when you were talking, Rob, I was just it was just bringing me back to the Nolan's principles, as boring as that sounds. But when I was in civil service and I worked with the Ministry of Justice and, you know, central government and everything, that was embedded within me as there's the principles of everything: integrity, selflessness, all of those things. And I think that it's lost its way. So I just want to kind of throw that out there before I bring some of these thoughts and comments in, even though they're all talking amongst themselves here. You know, don't forget us, we're here too. So I'm just going to bring in, you know, love your point about kindness and compassion, Marsha, and ensuring all sides feel heard. There's something that is unheard for sure at the moment, and that's focusing in on what Garry was saying as well. There is a bigger, deeper piece which Thom and Rob is kind of bringing in around the governance and the government side. But also there's that other piece, which is quite operational, that is, what can we do right now?
Yeah.
We as individuals, what can we control and what can we do and what can we change and how can we change the areas around us? Because sometimes we can look at the leaders and in government and say, well, we can't do anything, our hands are tied, but we can change our own little world in a kind of way. So I don't know. Anybody want to kind of?
Yeah, I'm thinking, you know, I had a huge client at one stage, and I took the CEO to task because of how he was behaving and the impact that was having within his organization, and he fired me, and it cost me an enormous amount of money and resource and everything else, and I think that's. I mean, I'm not sort of trying to make myself out as a hero here, because it jolly well hurt. But I think we've got to take a stand. We do have to take a stand, and that means risks. I think it's always interesting to reflect, you know, on the military. When you see these people who are awarded bravery awards, and you talk to them afterwards, they didn't do it because they felt brave or that they actually felt like they were doing something for the greater good.
Yeah.
In that moment, they were doing it because they didn't want to let their mates down.
Yeah. So, and that's important. That's really important, isn't it, Thom?
Well, it becomes a very personal thing, and I think. You know, if in history we keep seeing people standing back because they don't feel intimately involved, and I wish I could remember the saying, you know, you stand back from these things, and eventually you're the one that's being done on because everybody else has gone. And it's like, you get off the fence. This is just this.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
This is about it's. You know, we look at a bad male behavior in organizations and stuff like that, and one of the reasons that it continues is because it's condoned or not challenged by the people around you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I also think as well. Sorry, Thom. Did you finish?
Well, how many hours have we got? You know. All
right. Okay. Okay. Because I also think it's about how those leaders manage information. Can they manage information as well? Because I personally have been in environments where I'm working with leaders, and because I'm neutral, people will come to me and say things to me, and I've got to balance what, when, how, if on some occasions I'm going to share that with this particular person. Can they hold it? Can they manage it? Will they go puff and everything just go, you know, absolute worst? So managing that information, and as a leader, you've got to be able to balance that and manage it. And it's not everything that you know, that you have to let other people know that you know too. And I think that is a key part that I've seen. But anyway, I just want to kind of bring in a couple of questions, because I did put in that we would answer 2 key questions, even though I've got 3 or 4 here. Identity and belonging is key. Do you need to accept yourself first before being accepted by others? So a little bit of a self-awareness in there. So I'm going to put that one to you as the panel. So do you need to accept yourself first before being accepted by others? And that self-awareness, have you got any contributions to share just for a couple of minutes around that, please?
I was speaking to someone just a couple of days ago about their own story. This was a man of colour who's a South American by heritage, and the way he was telling his story, he was grateful for the leaders looking past his colour. And I challenged him on that to ask him about whether actually, isn't it just because of his excellence that they had no choice but to accept him, and that was he giving them too much credit for dealing with their racism on his particular individual circumstance? And so I think there are always ways that we can look at our own stories to try to accept ourselves for who we are and give ourselves credit for what we have been able to achieve, despite the barriers that have been faced. And when we can do that and love ourselves and who we are in the skin that we're in and in the circumstances we have with the layers that we do, we can more effectively work and relate effectively with others. And so that there is something about being able to hold ourselves and do some introspective piece of work as well around the own stories that we tell ourselves about different people and so on. I think it's the introspective piece of work is most important, because, as I tend to say, and Rob's gonna give me a little wink, I expect, that inclusion isn't about other people and their identities, it's about us and our behaviours. So what are those behaviours that we need to do is an introspective piece of work, individually, for leadership, for organisations, and then back to your very first point, that can then transform sectors.
Absolutely. And we've all been in environments, I see you, Rob, we've all been in environments, and even myself, I've got to sometimes remove myself and ask myself the question, Tony, what is it that you want? Why are you feeling this way? Is there something that I need to challenge myself on before I re-enter, into that space? So ultimately, it's an exercise that we all really need to do in terms of that self-exploration. So over to you, Rob.
I was going to say, Tony, that because in a way, this spotlight was shining on self-esteem, self-awareness, self-acceptance. Is almost inverting the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and a lot of us listening to this, a lot of us on this panel will perhaps know where I'm going with this, because I happen to live now, Tony, in a nice leafy part of Harrow. It's very nice around here. Thank you very much. I used to live in Harlesden 40 plus years ago. I've gone from Harlesden to Harrow, and to my friends, I like to joke, I've gone from working class to middle class. And I've traveled that journey, hanging on to my roots, of course. Yes. I know enough about who I am. Confidence is not a thing I lack. But you know what, Tony, if I went to bed tonight and someone threw an incendiary device through my letterbox and tried to burn me up, suddenly I'd lose grip of my self-actualization just a bit. Yeah. Suddenly, I'd be a bit worried if I could walk out the street and get back safely. Suddenly, I'd be cuddling my grandson a bit closer to say, not today, son. We can't go and look at the choo-choo trains, which we done earlier this morning, by the way, because I don't know if we're going to be attacked just because of the way we look. So it's all very well shining that spotlight on. And I totally agree. A lot of my work is about having people connect with their confidence and to build that self-efficacy. It's not how many times you're knocked down, it's how many times you get up. But if someone is trying to hurt me, if someone is trying to, it's a bit like these positive action programs that say, look, you know, we can help you and get you an ambulance to get to where you need. Well, don't break my legs in the first place. You know, don't stop me from maximizing my potential in the first place. That's why I opened up with the emphasis, Tony, on punishment and what we do when with due process, people are found guilty as charged. That's what becomes important when we're responding to things like riots.
Yeah, no, well, do you know what? That was so heartfelt, Rob. I felt it. I'm sure everybody felt it. Everybody across the globe felt it. And there was so much in there. But you know what? I'm going to give Garry the honor of responding to that or adding to it, because I see you shaking your head. I know that you've got lots to say in relation to, because change is an inside job, you know? So over to you, Garry, just for a moment. Not putting you on the spot, nothing.
Tony, like honestly, I've got to be honest. I'm feeling like a little bit of a happy Garry right now, because this is about, you spoke about modeling, right? If you look at the panel today and what we're exploring and the openness and the vulnerability and the humility and the exploration, this is what normal should be. Yeah. Like, this is what everyone should be able to do down the pub. This is what every business should look like. It's what every political party should look like. Like, it is possible. So I just want to hold space for a moment again to thank you, Tony, for bringing this together, because this is possible. Yeah. This is what normal should be.
And now, can I just add as well that the people that are on this panel are deliberately selected. You know, I didn't want to have this discussion with just people of color. I want to have this discussion with people that are not of color, you know, that are in different places too. So for me, that's what makes it enriched. So thank you, Garry.
Exactly. Just a final thing for me to then hear from Thom. I think the other really important thing about is what you just said is, if we're going to build cohesive, connected, truly celebrating different communities, you've got to do what Tony did. We've got to be intentional. And I love the word intentional, because it's in-tension. It's bloody uncomfortable. It should be uncomfortable, because you're stepping into something that's the unknown. It's challenging. It's difficult. It's uncomfortable. And that's where growth comes from. Like, you're not growing if you're not getting uncomfortable, people. So like, I just really just want to celebrate, like, that inner work is massive. And I just want to, my final comment, Tony, so many leaders, the reason I stay in the sectors I stay in, I've worked in the chemical industry for over 25 years. I keep wanting to run away from it. Why? Because I'm surrounded by people that look like I did 10 years ago before I'd done my work. And that's a really arrogant thing to say, but it's the truth. So that's why I stay in the sector, because I know that these people are hurting. I know these people are lost. I know these people have got a lot of money, a lot of power, but they do not know who they are most of the time. And they've got a lot of systemic leverage in chemicals, in financial services, etc. So I think I just want to leave people, everyone that's watching with us as well, think about leverage. And it comes back to Tom's point about power. Yeah, we've all got power. Yeah. We have all got way more power than we realize. You need to find the leverage point from your context and use that leverage.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Garry. And I've got a very fitting quote I'm going to throw in there. And that is that leadership is not about power and ego. We use our power and we give it away to empower others. And the more that we empower others, the more comes back and the more powerful we become. And it's a cycle. So ultimately, leadership is not about power and ego. It's about using it to empower others. So I don't know, Thom, did you want to come in before I move on to my next question? Because I'm going to go for it now. Did you want to come in briefly?
Well, yeah, I mean, what Rob was saying, this action is based, the whole thing is fundamentally based in fear, and people's actions come from that place of fear. And I don't want to make it sound simple, because the concepts are very complex and they're all intertwined. That there's an awful lot in it. But fundamentally, when people feel fearful, they'll either withdraw or they'll come out fighting. And I just want to say that I'll never forget, in my Royal Marines training, one of the things we did was dealing with riots. And the way we did that was that we were split into two, and half of us rioted and the other half had to deal with the riot. And I have to tell you, it's actually when you're allowed to do something which is bad, wrong, against the law, like throwing a brick, or indeed, as happened when we were doing, a car was set on fire, which was completely out of control. But I tell you, it's great fun. And that's part of the problem, that when you see people behaving in a particular way, and you think, well, my goodness, they're doing that, so I'll have a go at that. And that's the great problem with Donald Trump and the examples that he and his ilk are showing, because they break down the social structure, and then people feel the permission to do things which actually what was needed is their mother to give them a bloody good clip round the ear when they were kids, and it didn't happen. Sorry,
No, that's right. Can I just pick up on a point around the fear bit? Because quite often when I see the fear aspect, it comes up when people don't know what to do. They haven't got experience of this situation. This is an unknown. I don't know. And it could be leaders, for example, that instead of having those conversations, they're, going off to HR to look at what is the process for this particular, punitive approach. So it goes from one aspect and it skips the whole middle part, which is the doing bit, straight into this punitive piece. Yeah. And, it's something that I've seen very frequently when people don't know, they're very fearful. And so therefore they look in that direction. So time is pressing on. We've got a few conversations, a few comments in here. So Devi, poor role modeling, thank you. We've got Ash Warrior, who's saying that many key triggers is who am I? We need to work from inner space too. We've got Rachel, who's saying only self-awareness and self-acceptance can be truly, authentically ourselves. This includes understanding our own socialization and the biases and assumptions about others that we carry as a result of this. Thank you so much. What a great contribution. We've had a contribution from Stella, who said something on the back of what Garry said. Thank you for saying this out loud. It would be amazing to explore this with these influencers. And that was about wealth. That was when you were talking about wealth in particular. Let's see if there's any others in there. Some conversations amongst themselves. But I am going to be ambitious. We've only got a few minutes, but I'm going to be very ambitious because I want to ask you another question as a panel. And that is, are they safe or brave spaces? Do we need to be vulnerable to be brave before we move into this safe space? Because ultimately, people call them safe spaces, but are they safe? And do we need to be vulnerable? So are they safe or brave spaces? Any thoughts, panel?
I remember off the back of George Floyd in the summer of 2020, there were a lot of listening sessions that kind of sprung up, and to some extent, they were useful, but it did feel a little bit, and if you'll pardon the expression, feel a bit like trauma porn in some cases where people were being asked their stories, and they were being shared, and yet nothing then happened as a result of the sharing. There probably was very little debriefing. And so there was a lot of vulnerability from those who were traumatized, and there was this opening up of a conversation, but very little to listen to respond to react to it, to recognize and respond to those experiences. And then of course the systemic change hasn't really happened on the scale that we needed it to. I think there's something. I'm going to do a keynote tomorrow, and I have framed it around this idea of fear, actually, Thom. And the key quote that I've got around that is, "Fear is the cheapest room in the house. I would like to see you living in better conditions," which is from a Persian mystic poet from the 14th century.
Thank you so much.
And I think when we're thinking about vulnerability and we're thinking about holding safe spaces, there is a fear that is what vulnerability is. It's confronting your fear and doing it anyway, concerned that you're not going to be protected, that you're not going to be safe. And, again, something the same in the book, Naomi Klein says, fear is a survival response. You need somewhere to run to. When you don't have anywhere to run to, then, that's where it becomes paralyzed.
Yeah.
So being able to have somewhere to run to is important.
Thank you so much, Marsha. No, thank you so much. Very, very valuable insight there and very valuable sharing. And I don't want to skip over it. I do want to hear from the others as we move to that conclusion as well. But ultimately, is it a safe or brave space? If you could just take a moment to just answer that. If anyone else has got any thoughts around that before we move to a conclusion. Rob, Garry, Thom, just sharing. Stella's saying, powerful conversations and time for change, being intentional and acting with purpose. Thank you to all the panelists. So thought-provoking reflections, people of influence, fear, safe spaces, so much to unpack. Go for it, Rob.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about my current feelings on this so much, Tony. It's safe to say, I don't really think of it as either or. In my mind, in my heart, I'm thinking what we need is a space that is forgiving. So forgiving spaces. I think we need graceful spaces. I think we need compassionate spaces. I think we need to leave the back door open for love to enter and to remind ourselves that we are capable of demonstrating the love towards one another. Martin Luther King spoke a lot about this and the strength to love, and that with if we are going to reach for those well-known quotes, there are so many that fit as part of the prescription for right now, to give our hearts a chance, to give peace a chance, to imagine what the world might really be like if we just gave each other the benefit of the doubt. And so brave, yes. Safe, yes. Thank you very much. But let's get some grace and some forgiveness and some compassion in there as well, because we are capable of all of those things. It's not either or, it's both and.
Do you know what? That was kind of like a really good roundup speech, Rob. That's how it kind of felt and landed to me. And I think that, the essence of that is about leading with love and open heart, being, open to that. And I quite often say, build those relationships. When you build those relationships, it's easier to have any conversation. If one of your staff members wants to tell you about their cat or whoever it is, their cat called Felix that keeps doing the wallpaper, let them share about it, ask them about it, and but these are the things that, sorry, did I really give that as an example? That was a terrible example, wasn't it? What was I thinking about? But you get where I'm going with that, so we can talk about other things other than work. Because if we just restrict our conversations around work, then, where does it leave us? I'm going to throw something in before we kind of conclude, and that is about the police commissioner. There was a headline from the BBC today around the Met police commissioner sets out plans to be anti-racist. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes and if they can role model that. And you never know. We might be back here with this panel again, talking about that, because those are the kind of things that I love to discuss and unpick. So that whole role modeling. So I'm just going to say thank you to everybody. Marsha, you may want to just mention your book really, really briefly. But as I move around, if you could just give one thing as a tip to those that have joined us as we kind of move to that conclusion. So Marsha, over to you, and then we'll move to Garry, Thom and Rob, just leaving our listeners with some tips. Thank you, Marsha.
Psychological safety is a really crucial thing. If you can afford it to other people, it really will help you to grow and become a better human being within your workplace. If you do want to find out more about that, check out my book, Building Inclusion, Practical Guide to Inclusion and Architecture of the Built Environment, out now.
Thank you so much, Marsha. And yes, go and check it out. Thank you so much for contributing today. Garry, any closing thoughts?
Yes, being the disruptor that I am, Tony, I'm going to steal a few quick things. One's just going into the chat, which is check out Tema Okun's work around white supremacy culture patterns. It's such an important work that I've learned about because it affects every part of our lives, and it shows how fear is intersectional with right to comfort, which is intersectional with growth is bigger and more, which is intersectional with defensiveness. So there's all of these really innate human traits that we've all got. We've all been brought up with them, but we don't actually understand often how they intersect with each other when we're at work, at home, in a relationship with somebody else. So check that out. I would invite. And the only other thing is building a vulnerability muscle. It's like going to the gym. Like, you've got to practice it. And the more you practice it, the easier it gets. So that would be my look at those guns that Rob's displaying. Clearly done a lot of vulnerability work.
Building his muscles. Thank you so much, Garry.
Thank you, Tony.
And thank you, Rob, as well for that. So, Thom, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, you talked about the Met Police Commissioner talking about becoming an anti-racist organization or words to that effect. I think that's a load of malarkey. It's a load of rubbish, bollocks, balls. And actually, what they need to do is to say, we are a racist, we are racists, and we are going to do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, we starting out by saying it puts them in a position of power. It makes them greater than, and it is demonstrating a power dynamic they're probably not even aware of.
Well, this is it. This is absolutely it. And I think that, you know, it goes back to the Casey review and all the recommendations out of that and accepting that, look, this is the space. It's not a great space, but actually this is a starting point and moving on. So role modeling is key.
And sorry, Tony, and I'm not saying that as some sort of wise person who's done all the work and that. I make a point when I run my leadership program is saying, yeah, I'm a racist. I was brought up to be a racist. The importance of where I'm coming from is from an attempt to be self-aware so that when I have racist thoughts, I notice them and then I can make a choice about what actions I take.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that was what Rachel was saying about the biases and aware of our own stereotypes and biases. So thank you so much, Thom. Really, really appreciate that. Rob, any closing thoughts? And then I'm going to conclude.
All right. I just want to say that's one of the reasons why I love Thom Dennis is his brutal honesty, starting with himself. And the example that we've got a spotlight on with the police, for example, where the Metropolitan Police anyway, is still led by someone who refuses to acknowledge institutional racism and gives us the reason because there is no single definition, even though there is one if you look in the right place, Mr. Rowley. But there we are. It's not one rotten apple that spoils the barrel of apples. It's the barrel that's rotten. Go study, if you need to, Scarman, juxtapose Macpherson. It's all there if you really want to lead on these issues. Why they say what they say, Tony, is part of their privilege, that invisible advantage that they choose to ignore. I'm going to close. I don't know why, Tony, but the words that my father left me with, it's 7 years ago that my dad passed away. It was on the 21st of November, and it's 7 years this November. But every now and again, my dad pops into the front of my mind and grips my heart and reminds me of something he taught me when I was growing up. And I think it's a reminder for me to do all that I can. Dad said to me, son, when here a task is set for you, don't idle, sit, or view it, nor be content to wish it done. Begin at once and do it.
Absolutely.
Hallelujah.
I love that. Thank you so much. And said with such, I love that, Rob. Thank you so much, all of you. And I just want to close with some thoughts. So some real tips, focus on building those relationships, perhaps have an open door, you know, where people can pop in at any level in your organization, pop in for a talk. I used to have mine regular and meet all the staff come in for a cup of coffee. There doesn't have to be an issue. You know, as a leader, I used to go in the staff room and grab coffee there by the urn so that I can have those chitty chatty cat conversations. I don't like cats, by the way, but I don't know why I'm just doing this cat thing at the moment. But ultimately, those are where the informal conversations take place, by the photocopier and in those places. You know, if you're going to have a conversation, think about the environment that Marsha was talking about earlier on as well. You know, if you're going to the chief exec's office, it can make people feel really uncomfortable. Go in their space where they feel comfortable, or neutral spaces. So lots to really, really be thinking about. In relation to the police headline, I think we need to come back and have a thorough one and discuss that. But what comes to mind is my quote around, we're all human, we all make mistakes, but it's what you do next that counts. All right. And in relation to leading with love and compassion, I want to leave by saying the only qualification required to lead with care and compassion is to qualify as being human. And on that note, I just want to say thank you to Marsha, Garry, Rob, and Thom for, you know, what I thought was really thought-provoking. And I hope you did too. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to reach out to any one of these experts here, and they will bring you into their world of the work that they're doing. And I hope you'll join us again next time. So on that note, I just want to say thank you to everybody that joined us, that asked us a question or a thought. And on that note, bye for now. Thank you for spending time with me and my guest today on Critical Reflections with Your Critical Friend. Today, you got just a very, very small sprinkling of Tony's fairy dust. But if you'd like more, then do reach out. For speaking or hosting, it's TonyMcClelland.com. For social impact, social justice, or social mobility, check out our work at firstlifegroup.com. I look forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, feel encouraged, be inspired, be empowered, and make a difference. Bye for now.